Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. My name is Walt on this Thursday, May 18, 2017. And I have a little sad news to relate. Joel Elston, unfortunately, well, fortunately for him, he's doing great. His new position as director of the clinic that he has helped to found in the Richmond, Virginia area is just taking off. And his relationship with his two foster sons is really flying. Everything is working out so well in his life. So well, in fact, that unfortunately he can't do the show anymore, which is sad for me because we had such a great time doing it. But we have a year and a half of legacy of all the shows that we did, and it was just a great time. So, Joel, we wish you all the best. And we have a new co-host that's going to be joining us next week. His name is David Barsky, and I'll give you a full bio on him when I introduce him next week. But for this week, my brother and sister-in-law are stepping into the breach once again to fill the gap and help me do the in-between show. So, Mark Uohna, thank you for helping me do the in-between show.
We've become good at doing in-between.
That's right.
It's good to have a skill, I've always felt.
Yes.
And as often happens, we were actually kind of struggling for a topic this week. And then I remembered I had asked Uohna to remind me of what some of the hormones are involved in the process of how our good feelings and bad feelings actually feed us physically, how they actually impact the way the body operates. This is information she had shared in a show that she recorded with me, about 2.5 years ago. And she gave me that information again, and we said, well, let's make it about that, because that was a pretty interesting topic, I have to say. The idea that you can actually, through your emotions, influence the way that your body either heals or destroys. It's really kind of scary that it works both ways.
Right, but yeah, it's good news for us.
It's good news because we get to know of a way to basically take control of our physical lives in addition to our emotional and spiritual lives. So that's encouraging. And that's kind of been the underlying theme of the show, taking back the control. Absolutely, it is. No doubt about it. Now, the information that you drew from came particularly from one book by one author. The book was published 20 years ago. What was the book?
Molecules of Emotion by Candace Pert. She is, I think still is, a neuroscientist, and she worked with the molecules in the brain and the body, and she discovered that most of these molecules were associated with or being released by things that were happening in the emotional center of our brain. And so then she realized, based on years of research, that the way we feel depends almost entirely on the molecules that are flowing through our blood body at one time or another.
And she's well credentialed. I mean, she has a PhD in pharmacology from Johns Hopkins University. That's not too shabby.
Oh yeah, that's top of the line.
Undergraduate studies in biology with a cum laude degree from Bryn Mawr College. That's not too shabby either. So and she also conducted a National Institutes of Health postdoctoral fellowship for the Department of Pharmacology at Johns Hopkins from 74 to 75. I mean, so she has some pretty intense credentials.
She does, yeah, and I think she either worked for a Nobel Prize scientist or she was in the running for one or something about a Nobel Prize being talked about in relation to her and her work.
There is one sad thing, you may not have been aware of it. She did die. She died in 2013.
Oh, really?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, she died in 2013, age 67. But she left us a legacy that's just absolutely tremendous.
Wow. So when we were talking about her, she was already dead?
She'd already passed, yeah. Yep.
What did she die of?
I don't really know. Let's see. Does it give any information? No, it doesn't. The report I'm seeing, this is a Wikipedia article. It doesn't give me any information about it.
She wrote a biography / thing. I read another book, not The Molecules of Emotion. She wrote another book, and there was some mention of her dealing with some illness, but it was nothing serious. I guess I don't know. Well, now I have to go research that. So
yeah. Well, I'm sorry to put a downer on it, but let's go to the positive side, because the molecules of emotion basically set a new standard in terms of our understanding of the control we have over our own bodies. And maybe just give like a 2-minute overview. What does the book teach us?
Well, firstly, even though learning of her death was sad, I feel happy about the legacy that she's left. In terms of what she has helped us understand, and she was one of my heroes as a female neuroscientist and all that. So I'm still happy. But so she basically helped us understand how emotions work, because we had this kind of nefarious idea about emotions as feelings and things that we couldn't really touch or see, or then she kind of made them physical, right? So now she says that there are these hormones or neurochemicals, and they are circulating in our body in response to what we're thinking, which is controlled by the emotional centers of our brain, and then they get released by the hypothalamus, and as they flow through the body, there are receptors on our cells that these molecules are then going to latch on, and that those receptors allow the molecules to enter our cells. And when they enter our cells, the reactions that they trigger is responsible for the way we feel. So, for example, the feel-good hormones, the endorphins, and the serotonins, when they are flowing and are entering our cells, we feel happy, we feel optimistic, we feel energized. But when we have cortisol or adrenaline flowing through our system, especially for extended periods of time, that's when we start feeling stressed and depressed and angry and frustrated and all that kind of stuff.
And to give us an idea of just how, I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for, mind-bending, I guess, is perhaps the word, this whole bit of research is, our knowledge as a human species about endorphins, about about adrenaline and about dopamine and the hormones, the neurotransmitters, it's only about 40 years old, isn't it? I mean, it hasn't been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And she was at the forefront of learning this stuff.
Exactly. It was relatively new stuff, and we went from discovering that they existed, and there's a funny story because adrenaline and epinephrine are the same molecules, but they were discovered by an American scientist who called it adrenaline, and then a British scientist discovered the same molecule and called it epinephrine, and it was only years later they realized it was the same molecule.
Nobody ever bothered to look at the molecule? Oh my goodness. Hey, Frank, I mean, this molecule looks an awful lot like ours. I mean,
time when science was not as collaborative as
Really?
Yeah, I know. Well, now you have the internet and people are sharing, and
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's a lot different. But yes, so they were discovering the existence of these molecules, right? And then we weren't quite sure what they did, and then we moved there from the realization that they existed to the fact that they were associated with, there was the sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone and all that kind of stuff. And we kind of figured, okay, one dominates in men and the other in women, that kind of stuff. And we moved from there to really understanding that these hormones are specifically associated with certain functions. But what Candace Perth did was actually mapped out the reaction, each stage, each step of the reaction, which had not been done before. So it was quite enlightening.
So in your introduction, you pointed out that there are feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters and feel-bad hormones and neurotransmitters. Yes. By the way, let's also define our terms here. We don't really want to make this a science lecture, but what exactly is a neurotransmitter?
So a neurotransmitter is the term given to a neurochemical that flows between neurons. So you have two neurons and they meet, and there's a gap between them. They don't actually touch. There's a small gap called a synapse. And when neuro energy or information is being transmitted through these from one neuron to another, it does so in the form of these neurotransmitters. So one neuron, number one, will get an electrical impulse, and it will cause a release of these neurotransmitters that will then be picked up by neuron number two. It releases it into the synapse, and then neuron number two picks it up, and then it passes on to neuron number three, and that's how impulses and information travels throughout the nervous system.
And this is pretty significant stuff, wasn't it? Because the whole concept of a neurotransmitter kind of upset the earlier model about how the nervous system works. I mean, they thought it was just all purely electrical impulses, and this said, no, it's not. It's more than that.
Right. Yeah, there was like these funny chemical things involved.
Chemical thingies.
Because it was kind of, it was very controversial 40 years ago, because we had the diehard electrical people, who said, chemicals, that cannot be that, And then there were the neurochemical people who were saying, hello, I think we got something here that you guys might want to pay attention to. And I think the original scientists, they went to their graves holding on to their, respective beliefs. And it wasn't until later on, when we had the more sophisticated tools, that we could actually see things in real time and measure the release of these tiny burst blips of neurochemicals, because the change in the concentration is so minute in terms, relatively speaking, that it was hard to actually detect what was going on. But now we can, and so now we know that there are some electrical connections where neurons touch, but those only make up, I think, maybe 5 to 10% of all the connections in the body, because for the most part it's a chemical transmission that takes place.
So we don't really want to turn it into a science lecture. Let's start taking this back to law of attraction and to our ability to basically control our bodies in ways that we didn't even know we could do before all this research took place. And if I'm not misreading this, even today I get the sense that there's still a lot of resistance to the idea that we can have this kind of control within the research community. Am I wrong about that?
Yes, there is still a lot of resistance for a number of reasons. The whole idea of you being completely responsible is something that some scientists have a problem with, because, they still believe that genetics and the environment and, the things you eat and all that kind of stuff are stronger determinants, is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
of what's happening to you. But what Candace Pert is saying, that you actually have more control than you realize, because what she discovered is that these neurochemicals or neurotransmitters, the release of them is controlled by the area in the brain that I mentioned earlier, the hypothalamus, which is basically the chemical lab of your body. It makes the chemicals, but that hypothalamus is then controlled by your brain, and it's controlled by the area of your brain that's responsible for your emotions. So basically, when you think a thought, and it could be consciously or subconsciously, when you respond to your environment, where you see something or you hear something or you feel something, that then turns on certain areas of the hypothalamus, and particular chemicals are released, and then you, as they affect the cells in your body, then a feeling or an emotion, as it were, is produced.
Okay, so now let's turn it into something that we can actually use, because right now I feel like we're in science class, and and I did okay in science, but a lot of people didn't, and I'm afraid that we're losing people.
Yes. So the basic idea is that if you want to feel good, then you can do so by changing the thoughts that you're thinking.
Okay. And does that have particular consequences?
Right. Yes, absolutely. So if you start thinking thoughts of gratitude or love or happiness, you start thinking those thoughts, then it actually triggers areas in your brain to respond, and then the chemicals, the feel-good chemicals, the serotonin and the endorphins are produced, and then you start actually feeling, those chemicals take over, and your whole body feels good. And I know this might be new for some people, but they may be more familiar with endorphins as it's associated with something less subjective, we know for a fact that when you exercise, that you release endorphins, the feel-good hormones, right? So that's to an extent you taking charge, basically, of what's happening in your body. So as you go out there and you exercise, you walk, you run, you hike, you swim, whatever you do, then those endorphins are released, and eventually, within a period of time, you start feeling a lot better than you were before you started exercising.
And I didn't realize that endorphins are essentially painkillers.
Yes. Yep.
Which is a little bit surprising. I mean, I guess that is reflected in the fact that people become addicted to drugs that they shouldn't become addicted to because they eliminate pain. So I guess we shouldn't be too surprised. Yeah. But it almost makes me wonder, is feeling good really just getting rid of pain?
No, it isn't. But the thing is, it's very closely connected in the neuronal system. There are a lot of crossed wires, as it were, without getting too technical. But there are areas in the brain that are responsible for pain, and some of those same areas are responsible for you how you feel, and that's why pain is so very subjective. And so, for some people, minimizing pain is their way of feeling happy. And then for other people, the absence or presence of pain, but it's very closely linked. And that's why it's hard to separate them. And that's why endorphins. So the thing about the endorphins is that, like I was describing before, these are these neurochemicals, and you have receptors on your cells that recognize these neurochemicals, and the neurochemicals get latched onto the receptors, and the receptors allow the entry of the neurochemicals into the cells. So the receptors are on regular cells, skin cells, stomach cells, liver cells, as well as on the neurons, right? So you have neurons that are responsible for pain, and they have receptors for endorphins, but you have the same receptors on other cells. And that is why there is this very close relationship between pain and the absence of pain and feeling bad or feeling good, feeling happy or sad.
I think we're back in science class again, so maybe we need to go in a different direction.
Okay.
Let's try it this way. I remember from the first time we talked about this about 2 years ago, we laid out a scenario that I found to be fascinating, which is that if you're feeling, correct me if I go wrong here, if you're feeling happy and you're feeling good, and let's say there's some sort of, maybe you have an infection or you have some sort of a tissue injury or something, what the body ends up doing is sending signals through the nervous system to go heal that spot. Am I wrong about that?
So that's correct. That's correct.
And similarly, if you're feeling sad, down, depressed, frustrated, angry, that same spot starts getting basically signals that say, get worse.
Right. Because, again, it's also very interconnected. It's hard to separate them. So, again, you have these cells in your brain that help you to feel happy. And then you have these cells that are part of your immune system that are responsible for repair and rebuilding of tissue that's injured, or even the removal of antigens, unwanted antibodies, and stuff like that. And those cells, the white cells that are part of the immune system, they also respond to those very same endorphins that are flowing through your body when you feel good. So it's almost as if the endorphins, the feel-good hormones, are an additional arsenal for the immune system, for the white blood cells, that then allow them to do their work even more efficiently. Whereas when you feel badly, stressed out, depressed, you're releasing cortisol, and they are destructive to your white blood cells.
And cortisol does what? What are some of the side effects, if you will?
Well, first, so cortisol is the the fight or flight hormone.
Okay.
So when you're faced with danger or some kind of life-threatening situation, the cortisol is what's going to raise your heart rate, get you charged up, energized, ready to go, or ready to defend yourself, ready to run, whatever. So your heart rate goes up, blood rushes to the larger to the limbs and to the eyes, and everything that's involved in defending yourself. And it's
which is important for a short-term situation.
Exactly. For a short term, it's necessary, and it does its thing. The thing is that we now no longer live in a environment of the saber-toothed tiger, So
a part of that, I guess, is more or less shutting down the healing response, because that's not priority in those moments.
Right. So yes, the limited resources is now going to be directed to getting away or defending yourself, right? And so then it's going to start doing that, whatever needs to be done, but then it should stop. And then the resources, the energy, the nutrition, everything should now be focused back to keeping the body healthy, keeping it alive, keeping it happy. But what happens, unfortunately, is that cortisol, because we're constantly in a stressed type of environment, and we kind of walk around stressed all the time, and so our cortisol levels are perpetually high. And so after a while, the cortisol no longer becomes the fight or flight hormone. It starts doing damage to your body. It starts, excess cortisol can actually start destroying your healthy cells, and in particular cells in the brain, and then even in more particular, if that's an expression, the cells in the hippocampus that is responsible for memory. That's one of the first things to go when you are under a stressful condition is your memory.
I forgot that.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, what that basically is pointing to is that if you live in a state of feeling down most of the time, you're basically sending signals throughout your body to start killing off cells.
Yes.
And how many people live like that?
Yeah,
right.
Unfortunately. And that's why, there's several quotations around that say about anywhere between 70 to 90% of all the illnesses that we face in our society, the underlying cause is stress.
So what the doctors have been telling us for years is true. Stress isn't good for you. They just kind of understated it.
Yes, exactly.
They really did. I mean, it's not like they were telling you, well, you want to avoid stress because it's going to kill you. They told you, well, it's just not really good for you. Right,
yeah. Yeah, you're right, because just like they have a Surgeon General warning on the cigarette packs, they need to have a similar warning about stress.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty serious stuff.
It will kill you.
And it becomes... Here's that word, it becomes chronic.
Yes, exactly.
It leads to chronic conditions. How many chronic illnesses are there in society today? It's astonishing.
All the major ones are chronic. So
it makes me wonder, are they all connected in this way?
Yeah, because we did a good job of getting rid of, all the biological type diseases, so now the only thing that's killing us are these chronic, quote, lifestyle diseases that are perpetuated or caused by stress. The good news is that they're all reversible. If you remove the stress, the disease gets better and even goes away in most cases.
And this is the other part of what we talked about 2 years ago that really caught my attention, because not only is it reversible, but you were telling me about how quickly the body responds.
Right.
I mean, if I remember correctly, when these neurotransmitters start transmitting, because we're feeling either the happy side or the positive side, the negative side, let's assume it's the positive side because we're into positivity here. The moment that you start putting out these positive feelings, 90 seconds later, your body is affecting the cells that need to be healed. 90 seconds. I mean, that's like that. That's pretty quick.
Yeah. I just recalled that was from another book that we read, Stroke of Insight, by the other neuroscientist, Jill Bolte-Taylor, who suffered a stroke herself and who was able to, while still debilitated, to understand everything that was happening to her, because she had been a neuroscientist for over 10 years or more at that time. And even through her rehabilitation, she could understand exactly what was going on. And that was one of the insights that she shared about the 90-minute rule, that you can actually change. And it would make sense that our bodies would be designed like that because, like, for example, the cortisol, it's not intended to persist. So it's supposed to be something quick and immediate and then goes away.
You said 90 minutes. Did you mean 90 seconds?
Sorry, 90 seconds.
Okay.
Whoa. Yeah, that would be a long time, wouldn't it?
Well, actually, it isn't, considering how often and how long we tend to stay in the negative, depressed state. But,
True.
It's longer than we have the tolerance to wait in many cases.
Yeah, it's kind of, I've heard it so many times, we're kind of taking it for granted, but 90 seconds is pretty quick, because we can stay in a funk for a long time.
For days, weeks.
Yes. And basically what she said is when that's happening is that we are actually re-triggering the release of those stress hormones every 90 seconds. That's why it persists.
Which is fascinating. From the moment that you told me that on that show that we did a couple of years ago, that was the point at which I became firmly committed to trying to improve my positivity levels on a day-to-day basis. And there are a couple of things that have come out of that. First is it's amazing how difficult it is to make the change on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made a lot of strides. I am certainly positively oriented, feeling positive a lot more of my day than I used to be 2 years ago even. But at the same time, it's like we have this built-in default mechanism that says, stay on the depressed side. The dark side of the force is awaiting you.
Right, because we've fallen into these habits, like you said, these default kind of attitudes and feeling. And here's the other thing that's really interesting, and I don't remember if it was Candace Pert or Bolte-Taylor or some of the neuroscientists that shared this, but what I found even more fascinating was that what happens with, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little bit sciencey here, but on the surface of our cells, on the membranes, the outside, we have the neurotransmitters, right? These are these little bodies that are kind of looking around and looking for their match. And what happens is as we have these habits are actually being determined by the chemicals that are flowing through our bodies. And so we have the receptors that for these chemicals are the ones that persist, right? And so if you are constantly in bad, stressed out moods, your cortisol, receptors are the ones that predominate, right? Because they're like, well, that's what you need, so we're going to give you a ton of those. And your receptors for endorphins and all the feel-good ones, they're actually going to decrease in number. And so it will be much easier for you to respond to a stressful situation. It's like second nature to you, as it were.
Well, plus you're also describing a scenario in which familiarity plays a role, doesn't it?
Right.
Because it's familiar to have all the cortisol receptors. We don't think of it as cortisol receptors. We think of it as just feeling depressed. But the familiarity of that persists in our nervous system.
Yes. But here's the beautiful thing. When you start deliberately triggering feel-good hormones, whether it's by exercise or you're doing your gratitude list or you're thinking happy thoughts, however often, the body takes notice, and they said, oh, we might have to, have a reissue in the number of receptors for these hormones because she is kind of feeling happier these days. We might have to reevaluate that. And if you keep doing that, more receptors for the endorphins are going to start poking out of your cells, and the DNA is going to start making more of these receptors. And then the ones for cortisol, they're going to decrease in number. And if you persist, eventually the receptors for endorphin predominates, and the one for cortisol, it reduces the number. And so your new default is one of happy, grateful, just excited kind of state, as opposed to the opposite. But, you have to know that can happen, and then you have to actually put steps in place to make that happen. But the fact that it can happen is so exciting.
So stepping out of science class for a minute, if you persist in staying happy, you'll feel happier.
Yes. Exactly.
Well, why did you say so?
I was hoping if I gave you the science background, it might add to the motivation. I don't know. It was for me.
That science background reminds me of addiction. Are they related?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right, because then when you have an addiction for certain drugs, you have these receptors for the drugs, and they become very active looking for that drug. And when you don't give it the drug, it's going to get really antsy, for want of a better term. And so, when you stop, then you go through that withdrawal period, which can be really painful. Wow. But you can change the quality and the quantity of receptors on your cells.
So do we become addicted to our negative emotions? And do we suffer withdrawal when we try to shift away?
Yes.
That's amazing.
I know.
So the bad news is most of us are addicted to negativity.
Yep.
The good news is we can break the addiction.
Absolutely, yes. There is.
And become addicted to feeling good
and
happy.
Yes, exactly. And don't we know people like that? And you kind of wonder what's wrong with them. But now you know that's just their default state. And that's how they operate. And you too can be like that.
Now, let's talk about dopamine for a minute, because dopamine is one of my favorite words. It's one of my favorite names because I have a certain association. Dopamine feels great. It's almost like a commercial on TV. Dopamine, it feels great.
Yes.
Why does dopamine feel great?
So dopamine is like serotonin, like endorphins. It's one of those neurochemicals that when it gets attached to the receptors and enters the cells, there are a number of reactions that take place, and those reactions are all life-giving, health-giving, feel-good type of reactions, and so it produces that kind of response in you. And that's and so there's a good and bad, because of course.
In other words, we don't really know.
So what we do know is that there are things that can, other than dopamine, that can attach to the dopamine receptors, and cocaine is one of them.
Which we really want to try to avoid.
Right.
We want to use the actual natural dopamine built into the system.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, because what we do know about dopamine, so like endorphins are released when you exercise, and serotonin is released when you think happy thoughts and you're hopeful for the future, and oxytocin is released when you hug your favorite person. Dopamine is
I can't let you just drop that one. Oxytocin is particularly activated when you hug?
Yes, it's actually nicknamed the hug hormone.
So we should be doing more hugging.
Yes. It's all about social contact, and it's highest in women when they just given birth, but it's also peaks for women. I think for men too. After that, what's the politically correct term?
Intimate relations.
Yeah, there we go.
So getting back to hugging, I hate to distract us, but
yes, but when you hug, you actually release oxytocin.
I have to ask this question: why hasn't anybody been touting the hugging cure?
I don't know. There are some people, I think, but they're a very small group. Yeah, there are scientists who work exclusively with this hormone, and they do great work. I've heard some lectures by some of them, and they kind of get relegated to the back of the hormone group for some reason. I don't know. They're kind of the new kid to the dance. So,
but this is pretty important stuff. I mean, literally, the act of hugging another person is physically good for both of you to the point where it helps you get into that positive, habitual place to be.
Yes.
That's significant.
Yeah, it is.
Helps you heal.
It does, exactly. Yeah, it's a powerful hormone, but we are just kind of now learning, a lot about, we know how, when it's released, but in terms of all the good things that it does, we're just now learning that.
Well, this is even a little bit more exciting than 2 years ago, because I don't even remember talking about oxytocin and hugging. But
Probably not.
But hugging, I mean, shoot, what the heck are we waiting for? Hugging is one of the nicest, most fun things you can do. Why are we, not saying, hey, we need to have 25 hugs a day in order to feel better. Let's do it.
Yeah, there are people who do say that. Yeah, they actually do say that you need, because they say, there's a number for how many men need and how many women need.
Oh, they do have it broken down. Okay.
Yes, they do.
Well, with this information, then, first of all, it helps me to understand why it's been a little bit of a struggle to try to get myself into the positive framework, if you will, on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. It also reinforces why it is that when you start bringing more of a positive attitude, positive feeling into your life, and you stick with it, it tends to stick with you.
Yeah.
Because it seems like this addictive quality works either way, depending on which hormone you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, we do have the power. On the other hand, we have to work at it.
Yes. It is within our control. But because of our past, for want of a better word, it's going to take some effort on our part to...
Well, I find that to be comforting, believe it or not.
Yeah? Okay.
And the reason I find it to be comforting is it explains why it is we don't seem to get the instant LOA results that The Secret promises.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, that's true.
Why doesn't it happen? I figured out why it was that a lot of people couldn't make The Secret work. I figured that out a few years ago. This is helping to fill that in, though. Because what I figured out is that if The Secret is... If the law of attraction is responding to our thoughts, and our emotions are basically the meters indicating whether what we're thinking about is congruent with who we are or not congruent with who we are, congruent with what we want to be, not congruent, that sort of thing, then what we really need to be doing is focusing on developing that skill. So why doesn't it work? Well, because it actually does work, just that we're spending all of our time on the negative side.
Yeah.
And we don't realize it. Most of us don't realize that most of the time we're not being positive.
You're right.
In fact, I've had conversations recently with a couple people. One of them was telling me, he started off by saying, I'm a very positive person. And then he spent the next 15 minutes describing all the ways that his girlfriend is negative. And he didn't recognize it. He didn't see that going on. I had to point it out to him. And the way I pointed it out to him is, okay, so those are all the negatives. What are the positives? And there was a long silence. He couldn't think of any.
Right.
He could not think of a single positive. And when I pointed that out to him, it kind of shook him. It kind of surprised him. Because we often don't realize even those of us who think that we're positive, we don't realize just how much time we're spending focusing on negatives.
Right, yeah.
So now having this information that tells us that our hormones, our neurotransmitters are basically playing off of what we're focusing on and giving us more receptors to match what we're focusing on. Well, no wonder it takes a while to shift. No wonder we don't get a quick result when we start, putting out there, this is what I want, in the field of all the time that I spend talking about the things I really don't want and that I don't like.
Yes.
If I spend all my day focusing on stuff I don't like, and I spend one little piece of it focusing on what I like, and then I expect the one piece that I like to come through, well, that's not terribly realistic.
Right. Yeah, because if we think of it in terms of these hormones and chemicals and the receptors and the neurotransmitters, we realize that, we've been doing one thing for so long, and it's going to take some time, like you said. And so just one burst of endorphin, it's kind of like working with a dysfunctional traffic cop. The dysfunctional traffic cop is saying, okay, stop. All right, now go. No, stop. All right, go, get going. Stop. It's crazy. Yeah. But that's what we're doing to ourselves every day. Right, exactly.
Well, now I have more incentive than I did even yesterday to focus on positives, because what I really am trying to do, and this is the part I've known for quite some time, I'm really trying to take my mind off of all the negatives I focus on, which can be a challenge.
Yeah,
some of those negatives we can find in our work lives or in our lives with our families or whatever. So it can be a big deal trying to overcome that stuff. I guess that's one of the reasons why the gurus teach trying to appreciate the good side of the stuff we deal with every day. Because by focusing on the good side, now we're at least giving ourselves a chance to feed ourselves the feel-good hormones instead of the feel-bad hormones, and start developing these little, what are they called? The receptors.
Receptors, yes.
Developing receptors that are more in alignment with what we really want. So there's actually a scientific reason to do all this stuff. It's not just the woo-woo of law of attraction.
No, there's lots of science behind it that we're only now understanding and relating to the LOA.
So I've been telling you about my struggles. How have you guys been doing? Are you applying it well, or are you caught in the same addictive trap that everybody else is like I am?
Yes, because we still have this attitude of, okay, you learned this exciting new thing and you're going to apply it, and the day you apply it, you expect magic.
and also we have successful periods of time, and then we have unsuccessful times. We lose our focus, or we redirect our focus, I should say, unconsciously back to the negative stuff.
But and Walt, I shared this with you, I think a couple of shows ago, that it's all about the efficiency of the body. The body is trying to make life as easy as it can for you. And one of the ways it does that is to resist change. And so, when you're trying to do things differently, the body is like, I don't know if you really want to do that. I'll kind of evaluate it as time goes on. And so, because, if you are in your same mode, that's easy. That's efficient. Something new, it's like, new resources, new chemicals, new everything. DNA's got to do different things and all that kind of stuff.
It's comfortable versus uncomfortable.
Right, and it's easier in terms of energy.
True.
And so the body's kind of going to do the easy thing and work towards making whatever you're doing as easy as possible. And so it's until you persist, and I never feel like I explained this right enough, but it's until you persist where the new thing becomes easier, requires less energy.
And that happens when your conscious mind convinces your subconscious that this is really important.
I don't know if that's when it happens. So I'm thinking still at the level of the neurons and the receptors. Because, we've talked about epigenetics, and at the level of epigenetics is where you actually change your DNA. So the DNA is what's producing the receptors.
It's interesting you mentioned epigenetics, because that's one of the things Joel's been studying recently.
Oh, okay.
We were going to spend more time talking about it, and obviously we didn't get a chance to do that. He's fascinated fascinated by this whole concept of epigenetics.
Yes,
and
because
what is basically opening up avenues of understanding that previously were limited by our genetically oriented identity and philosophy.
right, because for our longest time we thought that once it's in the DNA, it's written in the stone. But now we know that the DNA can be influenced by the environment, and it can change what it does. It's changed its patterns, it's what it produces. And so the DNA that's been producing the receptors for cortisol day in, day out, that's become easy. It's efficient. So to produce the receptors for endorphins now, that's going to be a new task on its list of things to do. And so until the work of producing endorphins, receptors for the endorphins, predominates or takes over the work of producing the receptors for cortisol, that's when you're no longer struggling, fighting. But the task is, the challenge is persisting to that place.
I didn't know DNA was involved in that.
Yes, DNA is involved.
Just not as much as we thought.
Right. Yeah, so it's not like you're, once you're born and your parents were this way, then that's, yeah, but no.
Which is encouraging. It's not like you're locked in now.
Absolutely. It is very encouraging because previously we thought that, happy people were born happy and unhappy people were born unhappy, But now we know
not just that you're born that way, but you're stuck with it.
Exactly. And
it turns out you're not stuck with it.
Now we know that's not the case. And we have scientific evidence, this whole field of epigenetics, as we were talking about, that shows that, you can change your DNA in terms of what it does.
Which is really important. I mean,
yes,
it isn't so much that you're changing the DNA itself. You're changing how the DNA operates, isn't it?
Exactly right. Because we in the field of biology and science, we talk about genes that are expressed and genes that are not expressed, genes that are turned on and genes that are turned off, and that's what genetics is all about. And just to get a little bit sciencey, because I'm so excited about this.
A little bit. We've been in very sciencey for a while, but go ahead.
No, like 10, 15 years ago, there was this push to identify the entire genome of the human body, and everybody that was a whole talk, and finally they did, and then they were surprised to find out that only like 5 to 10% of our genes are actually functional genes that actually produce functional protein. The rest of it, they don't know what it does, and they suspect that it controls the function of these, the smaller amounts of genes. And so epigenetics is the field of studying that 90% of the genetic material and how it works and how it's controlled and how it's influenced by, diet and lifestyle and environment and thoughts and all these other kinds of fascinating things. So,
in other words, it isn't the genes.
Right.
See, you have to learn how to really synthesize it down to the simple.
Yes, I learned that, but it's a challenge. I have you to do that, and you do such a great job.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just be your official translator.
Okay.
It's not about the bike. It's not about the tennis racket.
All right, so we have science to back the idea that we can make changes. Why don't we talk about making changes?
Okay.
Let's get off the scientific treadmill for a bit. We've been keeping the mice busy, so we'll let them continue to do their thing. But our thing is, we don't want to have to be scientists in order to make changes. And fortunately, we don't have to.
Yes.
Because all we really have to do is decide on a conceptual level, really, what it is we want to focus on.
Right.
And then focus there and watch our emotional reaction to see whether we're focusing on the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fairly simple formula.
Yeah.
It trips us up easily because we so often get caught up in that addictive quality we were talking about earlier. But nevertheless, it's a simple formula.
Right. Yeah, and this kind of reminds me of what we had talked about last week and the week before about the whole idea of visualization. Because,
Mm.
I was thinking about this YouTube video that I saw some years ago, where the person was talking about this very same thing, and she was saying that you can actually use visualization to instill a habit, because you can use your imagination / visualization to do something 100 times in your mind, and the brain and the body does not know any different. It's kind of like re-triggering the hormone, the release of the hormone over and over again, and you're retraining the cells to have a new default position. And so you may think, well, I don't know, how am I going to wake up every day for the next 100 days or whatever? But you can do that in your imagination over and over again. Like, you can spend 10 minutes and you could probably do it 25 times.
That was one of the weirder parts of watching The Secret for the first time, because they talked about how the space program, they used visualization to basically train the astronauts and so forth, and discovered just what you said, which is that when you visualize over and over again, your body literally can't tell the difference between the actual experience and your visualization of it.
Right.
I remember hearing that and saying to myself, yeah, right.
Well, the thing is, the body does not have a separate set of neuronal patterns for imagination versus reality. So when you imagine a task or when you do the task, it's the same neurons that are being triggered.
So, in essence...
So that's why...
I'm having trouble connecting it together. That's really what's in essence here.
No, so that's why it's such an effective tool for, say, professional athletes.
Yeah, was that guy a coach, or what did he find out about the 25% versus 75% of the people who train one way or another?
Yeah,
way?
I shared that last week. The same book that I was reading, where he divided the group into to four, and one did 100% of actual physical training. I think it was shooting a basketball, and then another group did 25% shooting, 75% visualization, and then another group did 75% visualization and 25% training, and then another group did all 100% visualization. And the third group, the one that did 25% actual training and 75% visualization, outperformed the other all the groups. But with athletes, right?
So before we miss that, before we leave that behind, what it's really suggesting is anytime that we want to accomplish something, we should be spending 75% of our time imagining that it's happening, and then physically training the other 25%.
Yes. Yeah, because I'm just, to stay with that a little bit, because what happens is when you imagine it in your imagination, you can perform it perfectly every time. And it's not practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. So if you're practicing a technique incorrectly, you're going to become good at doing it incorrectly. And that's one of the strong points about visualization. You can do it right, and you can practice doing it right, and you can run the neuronal patterns in your head for doing it right, such that pattern becomes strengthened and reinforced. And so even when you are in the throes of competition and you are out of body, the subconscious is going to take over and do that thing perfectly that you have practiced so many times. And whereas in real life you may be able to practice I don't know how many hours a day and how many times you're able to do it, with visualization, you can multiply that several times over, doing it perfectly every time.
Well, this actually does raise a point that has always been a point of confusion for me. Mm-hmm. Because, as you stated there in your scientific way, mm-hmm. you want to practice in your mind, you want to practice doing it perfectly. Mm-hmm. What happens if you can't imagine what doing it perfectly is? What happens is you you never really give yourself the chance to, quote, practice it perfectly, unquote.
Right, and that's why it was the third group, the group that did 25% of actual shooting the ball and 75% visualization, outperformed the group that did 100% visualization. Because like you just pointed out, if you don't know how to do the task, then it becomes difficult for you to do that task perfectly.
Even in your mind.
Mm. And so if you do know how to do it, you've been trained, you've practiced, you've been instructed, you've been coached, whatever it is that you have an understanding of the fundamentals, and you now know how to do it. You've done it at least once or twice, perfectly. Then you can save that image, that visualization, that memory, whatever, and that's what you're going to run. If you haven't done it, then it becomes difficult.
So this ties into the classic number one reason people become interested in trying the law of attraction for the first time, which is they want to attract money. I mean, health is a big one, relationships are a big one, but money is really usually the top of the list. Yes. And when people try to visualize getting a huge amount of money, much more than they're used to having in their lives, they almost never get it. Well, now I think we have a pretty good picture of why that's true. Yeah, it's because they don't really have a clear-cut model of how to bring that money into their lives.
Yes, exactly.
And if 25% of it is practice, well, you also have to be able to practice that within that 25% time, so to speak. You got to actually be able to practice bringing that money into your life, and you don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Which is why it makes much more sense to focus on trying to go incrementally up.
Yes, exactly. And that's why some, like Abraham Hicks, they say, go to the mall and spend $100 in your mind.
Yeah, right.
Get into the habit of actually seeing nice things and imagining what it would be like to purchase it. Things that are, within your limits, as it were, right now. And you keep doing that, and you build and you increase the amount until you become more comfortable. Because like you said, if you go outside of what you're comfortable with or what you are actually able to imagine, because the reality with which you're able to imagine it is what makes the difference. If you can engage all of your senses, so what it looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, that is what makes for a stronger visualization exercise, because then you engage multiple areas of the brain and the pattern becomes more widespread, and of course with more neuronal networks being involved, it becomes stronger, and then it really becomes part of the subconscious, as it were, and then it's easier for it to manifest into your reality.
Mm. And you used an example of spending money. It also works for making money.
Yes.
So if you're uncomfortable imagining swinging $1 million deal, no big surprise, start out imagining the $10 deals.
Exactly.
And then eventually the $100 deals, and so on.
And go from there.
All right. Well, as usual, we've used up an hour. We're pretty close to it. Not quite an hour. We're like 2 minutes away. I do want, before we leave here, first of all, I want to thank you for all the weeks you've been filling in while Joel wasn't able to be here, and leading up to my new co-host joining next week, David Bradsky. So thank you, both of you, for taking the time to fill in the gap, so to speak. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and we're always here to fill in the gap.
Well, that's a good thing. I also want to remind our listeners the various places you can find us, because while we are here on PRN, and you can find us on PRN every week, we are also findable in other places as well. We'd love to make you permanent subscribers of our show. How do you subscribe to our podcast? It's pretty simple. You can go to our website, loatoday.net. There's there's a great big subscribe button there. You can't even miss it. It's so big. We are also now on Apple iTunes. We're in the iTunes store, so you can look for LOA Today in iTunes, and you can subscribe to us there. You can also find us on Facebook and on YouTube, and we even put out little tweets on Twitter when we do shows. So there's a lot of different ways to find us, and it's pretty exciting.
And subscribing is free, right?
It's absolutely free, and we'd love to have you join us on the journey. So, Mark and Uohna, thank you for joining the journey today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.